Welcome to Wiseheads, where some of the sharpest minds in business share practical thinking to help you build a better business and make better decisions. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Lizzie Parker. Lizzie has spent more than 30 years building and growing brands across FMCG, dairy, food, and other categories, with experience spanning New Zealand, Australia, Asia, Europe, and the United States. More recently, she led marketing at Westland Milk Products for more than 8 years, helping build Westgold into an international brand and leading a growing marketing team across brand, digital, B2B, and corporate marketing. Today, we're talking about what experienced marketers learn once they've actually had to do the job. Why getting the foundations right matters more than chasing the latest tactic. How close marketers should really be to their customers. Has the explosion of data made marketing easier or more confusing? What makes a genuinely good marketing team? And after spending years on the client side, what actually makes the relationship between a business and its agencies work? Lizzie, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Adam. It's awesome to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, the journey that's taken you from mainland cheese and launching products in Thailand through to Heineken and other brands to most recently leading the marketing for Westgold.
I just fell into it really, but then I ended up loving it. I just did business studies. I didn't do anything to do with marketing and then ended up loving how you learn to influence people to try and buy your product. Probably more for me, got caught up in the excitement of the whole community around that and the excitement that happens. It's a bit of a buzz, whether it's Heineken and events or TV ads in Spain. There's a lot of glory wrapped up in marketing as well. So that definitely got me early on.
You've worked across a number of different businesses that we've mentioned already and categories and markets. After all that experience, what do you think you understand about marketing now that you definitely didn't understand when you first started?
I didn't really understand the depth of what it takes to influence someone to buy your product or to show them that they need your product and how many various tactics there are. And to be fair, 30 years ago, there was a hell of a lot less tactics than there are now. There was no email and there was certainly no social media. So you were using the main ATL type tactics. Your story was told over a far less number of channels than there is now. Now you have to choose out of a whole variety, and you obviously haven't got budgets to do everything. There's so many different ways to tell a story, and how do you choose that? How do you make those decisions?
There's often a theory on the agency side of things that briefs can be quite prescriptive towards being promotionally driven and being a short-term fix to a sales problem. To what extent, as a head of marketing, do you get to maybe push back if that brand building is quite important as well?
That is a huge topic right now. And in the Westgold role, that was becoming more and more prominent as this need for ROI. So to your point, it'd be more desirable for the powers that be to see more trade marketing. Anything to do with a retailer would be far more attractive because they perceive that there's a strong ROI with that and they can see sales immediately. So I was doing quite a lot of work to see how I could justify a marketing spend or actually get some more sign off on doing more brand building activities, which is where I felt we needed to be, particularly in Australia. We'd finished the year really well the previous year and we wanted to capitalize on that. We managed with the finance team to find some ways to justify social and that there was an ROI on social for every dollar you invested. It was like $3 to $4 return. There were some big assumptions with that, but I couldn't find a way to justify ATL. However, that doesn't mean there were more tactical briefs. We ended up using sales to justify doing some activity because there was an ROI, and I was still fighting to do the brand stuff because you still need to look longer term. So I guess the pressure was to do more tactical trade marketing, but that's not what I believed and I needed. I felt there needs to be a good mix. So there weren't more tactical briefs coming out of me, but there was pressure to do more. I still really believe in brand building because you need to de-risk your future sales.
Westgold is a challenger within quite a competitive marketplace with some established brands. To what extent does brand play a role in growing market share within a category where effectively the outcome is more or less the same? I mean, we're talking about butter here. There's not a lot of differentiation you can get from that promise.
Yes, it's a commodity category for sure. And so brand becomes more important because otherwise the minute you start dropping your pants on price, it's just going to be a downward spiral. And I learned that very early on in my mainland days. I'll never forget my boss saying, Lizzie, it's a downward spiral. Once you start, it's a race to the bottom. So I believe those are the categories where brand becomes more important, because what else are you differentiating on? Yes, you've got process. Yes, you've got how grass-fed your cows are, because that has a direct correlation on how golden your butter is, the taste of the butter and the texture of your butter. So it can be fundamentally different. The process plays a role in that too. Therefore, brand and knowing who you are and creating a personality is your one opportunity to stand out. So you need people to have decided that they love you before they get to the supermarket, so they just automatically select you because you've already been in their head. Otherwise, it becomes just price.
To what extent, as a challenger brand, do you need to effectively call out the incumbent and be unapologetic and say that you are better, faster, stronger, tastier, yellower?
I've never been in a situation where I've done direct comparison advertising. I've just felt we focus on what we do well and tell that story. But the key with a challenger brand is you need to be on more often and not just one big burst and then go off for a while and another burst. You have to be constantly reminding the market and chipping away, particularly because we've got much smaller budgets than those other big brands as well. It's your brand, your persona, your tone and manner that needs to differentiate you to be heard. Because if you think about those players you're referencing, they also have many more products under that banner. So they've got a huge opportunity for a halo effect where we didn't. We had literally, to start with, salted and unsalted, and that was that. So personality, how quirky we were or what we talked about or what we commented on, how we respond to people when they communicate with us on social.
What would you say to a founder out there right now that has two options? They can go to market with a new FMCG product that has just a range of 2 different things, or they could go to market where they have a range of maybe 6 to 10 different variants within their product range. What advice would you have for an FMCG brand considering those 2 options?
Making the assumption that the brand architecture is all under one brand, I would go for as many as you can, assuming they are all in the same location. Let's say it's in the chiller, and assuming everyone wants those products. You get more facings, so you have more impact on shelf. You can talk about it as one whole brand. You don't have to necessarily talk about all the SKUs, and you have more chance of securing a wider audience with different occasions or different products to meet different occasions. And they can shop your range rather than only having 2 to choose from. If you gave me yogurt and cheese and all these other dairy products as well as my Westgold butter, then I'd be bloody excited. If you said, I've got 6 flavors of butter, then I'd go, yes, let's start with a couple, because you want to get the groundwork done first, get them knowing that you do flavored butter. If 2 out of the 6 take off and the others are much, much weaker, then you're going to be out pretty quickly from a retailer perspective. So you need to build the credibility up with 1 or 2. And then as people know that and trust that your products are good and do what they say they're going to do, then you can launch the other one. If you're telling me that I've got butter and cheese and yogurt, so you've got them in different parts of the category or the chiller, then I'm going for that.
You said one of the things you're particularly passionate about is getting the foundations right. What are the foundations?
Think of them as foundations of the house or the building blocks of your brand. So let's assume you've got a market strategy already. You already know what SKUs you've got, pricing, etc. And you know where you want to pitch it, if you like. But we also need to know who you're targeting, which is not just an age or demographic, but what are these people interested in? Where are they? Where will you find them? What's important to them? What engages them? As well as who is your brand? What's its personality? How does it talk? How do you act? What do you care about? What hill are you going to die on? What do you look like? What's your identity? What's your dress code, if you like? Their stories about that brand, the identity messaging, the point of difference. What gift am I giving you as a consumer? That's what I would call the foundations. It's getting those basics right.
Why are businesses so tempted to jump to campaigns, channels, and tactics before they've properly sorted out those foundations?
Because they need to make money. They want to get going. They want to get a return as quick as they can. So anything they can do to get the sales rolling in is better than sitting and pondering upon what your brand's going to stand for. So a lot of them will test and learn. Brand building, taking that time is a real luxury. It takes effort, it takes resource and time, but it also takes money if you're going to do research. So not everyone can justify that. And once you get going and selling and doing that test and learn and just getting amongst it, it's pretty hard to go back and go, I'm going to do it properly now while we're rolling, and I'm going to spend the time looking at it, because everyone's going, well, why would you do that now? You look at the sales, look at the success we've got.
Sounds like there's a lot of pressure in that role of being the marketing lead within an organization to deliver outcomes sooner than later. What's that like to deal with?
It's getting more and more that way. There's more and more pressure going on to marketing teams around that ROI. There's less money being put into marketing. There's probably going to be less marketing teams in a lot of companies, I would think. I found it quite hard because I didn't know how to find the answer to what they needed. I didn't know how to show an ROI for a longer term brand build. No sweat finding an ROI on these tactical initiatives we were talking about before, but bloody difficult to justify it. And so that's where I felt the pressure. And it was something I found more recently. I'd been there 8 years and I'd built the team and built the marketing budgets up, justifying it and showing with the results over time, some of those lead results of awareness and those funnel kind of results. But ROI was becoming more and more of a focus and harder as a marketing team to really try and resolve without analysts or finance resource, because it wasn't necessarily our skill set either. And everyone was running, the finance team were really busy. We didn't have analysts outside of that. So how do you bring everyone together to go, we really need to solve this? When you're in a team in-house, you don't know you're the only one feeling that. I'm thinking, does everyone else know how to do bloody ROIs on this stuff? I don't, but you don't have time to go out and you don't know where to go and ask that question.
Is there a simple test for whether a business has its marketing foundations in good shape?
You could certainly make some observations, and that could be on their packaging. Is their range consistent? Do they change it every time a new product launches? It looks different. On social media, if you look at the whole grid, how consistent is it? Do they have similar iconography? Do they have similar colors? Is their tone and manner the same? Do they change their ATL message every time? So you can probably get a sense of when it's off by looking across a few things.
Can a good agency or good campaign compensate for weak foundations, or does the problem eventually catch up with you?
If you've got enough money, an agency can do an amazing job, an amazing campaign that'll really drive growth, but maybe slightly off brand, or the next campaign may be very different from the last one they did because it's a really cool idea and some creatives come up with this rip snorter of an idea and it drives sales again. But they might be quite different and not necessarily consistently giving the same messaging. So yes, I think depending on your budget, possibly, but for the more challenger brands, the smaller budgets, I think that gets harder to hide because you're just doing lots of little things and it needs to be consistent to cohesively build that one message or that one brand that you're trying to communicate.
You've said the customer need dovetails directly into getting those foundations right. How close do marketers really need to be to the people buying their products?
Obviously, you can't be in their pocket, but I think you really need to know who those consumers are. And that might not be doing plenty of research all the time, but it might be being in the supermarket, having a look at how shoppers shop, just popping in there yourselves on a regular basis, seeing what other promotions are going, seeing what other people are buying, watching them choose between the various brands at shelf. I think you have to be close, but close isn't necessarily asking them deep and meaningful questions. It could be quite observational. Social media helps you get closer because you can have a two-way conversation. It's not just pushing. Being able to observe and have conversations is really important. But probably the closest we'll get to that now is social, unless you're doing lots of focus groups.
Why is it really important that marketers remember that they are not the customer? And why do you think sometimes they forget that?
I think you forget it because typically you get so close to your brand and you feel a connection with that brand. So you perceive that I know everything about the brand, so of course I'm going to know how I would respond or anybody else would respond. But you're not. There's a target persona for your brand. You know who that audience is. There might be 2 or 3 different situations or occasions, but I might have different interests. I might be the different age group than the target market, and you don't think about them. You don't think how they would respond. You think how you would respond. A couple of examples. Well, one key example where I see it quite a lot is in social media when the content manager is writing content on behalf of, let's say, Westgold. So how often it's very hard not to be yourself in that situation. And so you forget, it's really easy to fall out of character. You're almost acting every time you need to write some content because you're acting like someone else. ChatGPT, as an example, is very good at doing personas these days. So you can really train them up and then fire all these questions at these personas about what do you think of that and what's this line like and what do you think of this packaging. And I think that will counter a lot of the challenges that are happening now where people think that they are the target market and answer things.
You just talked about synthetic focus groups. As an FMCG brand, would you use synthetically sourced data and insights as a source for business decision making?
I don't think you'd use it in isolation, but I think it's quite interesting. With Westgold, we did a huge U&A study in the States to every state, and we found out of about 5 different personas, 2 were more Westgold-esque and could tell you exactly what they're like, what was important to them. And then we could tell you in every state how many of them there were from this study. So we were quite clear on who those target markets were. We tested that in New Zealand and Australia just in our tracking, and we could see that the same groups were there, which was awesome. So if I could teach AI who those personas were and how they responded to things, we might need to do some more work around that. But if you could teach that, then you could pose some questions to them. I don't think it would replace the luxury of tracker and testing responses to various campaigns or testing how maybe a new product might work. But over time, possibly.
Westgold operates across very different markets: Australia, New Zealand, the US, Southeast Asia, China, and others. What have you learned about the difference between a fundamental customer need and the way that need expresses itself culturally?
We found, particularly with New Zealand, Australia, USA, that the consumer need around butter was pretty similar. High butter usage, cooking, baking. Their need from an occasion perspective was pretty consistent. We did some cool research in the USA where they showed us their fridges. And what was learning there is that they have a different butter for different needs. Functionally, they had a grass-fed butter when they were cooking eggs. They would have a normal everyday US butter for baking. But some people would go, no, we need a really good grass-fed butter or yellow butter for baking so it looks better. So their need and how their different occasions were the same, but they felt functionally different butters. They've obviously got a hell of a lot more choice over there. Different butters did different things. Australia, the same. But what was different was probably the messaging, the nuancing of the messaging. So in America, they really cared about organic, but their organics probably are grass-fed. Grass-fed, the taste. Taste was definitely king. We found that out. What it looked like and their belief that grass-fed butter was healthier. So we messaged that more significantly. Where in New Zealand, what else is there other than grass-fed? So you don't have to hit that message as hard. Australia is still into grass-fed as well because they have hot temperatures and there's a lot of droughts, and so it's not always guaranteed to have grass-fed butter. But then Asia, they also have that same messaging. So while their diets and their use of butter is far less, you still have the same need when they buy butter. So they still want a healthy New Zealand. They see New Zealand as being important because it's grass-fed, free-range cows. So the messaging's different, but the needs are similar.
To what extent is brand New Zealand still a hook offshore than perhaps it was maybe 10 years ago?
I don't know definitively, but my gut tells me it's less important a little. I still think New Zealand's fundamental, that it's clean, green, and all those lovely old messages are still really relevant. But if you think of China, they thought that they couldn't be as good as us before, where I think they're getting more pride in their own now. So they have less concern about safety over there, is my perception, because they're more likely now to put Chinese writing on their packaging, which before you would go, no, make it look all English because that would give it more credibility. But more and more they're happy now. Perhaps that's language as well, and they're being more realistic that not everyone speaks English. But I think they're getting more confident in what they can do themselves. They don't need to have the New Zealand stamp on it. USA, still really important, but a lot of them don't have a clue where New Zealand is. So you kind of lose that importance as well. So you really have to educate on that and why that means it's better. So that's why maybe the farming system is a good story, for example, is that it's a grass-fed system, because that's what they see first. Where would that be? Oh, that's New Zealand, rather than leading with New Zealand. But I don't have the research on that. NZTE might feel very differently about that.
If I have an FMCG jam brand and I'm now in Pack and Save, I'm in New World, I'm in Woolworths, I'm doing okay. I'm taking some share off the market leaders. How do I know when I'm at the point where I'm ready to move into Australia or move into the UK markets or the US? What's a signal that tells me it's time to take that step?
Probably the most logical one is I've got the volume I can get here. There's not much more headroom, and therefore I'm going to need to find growth from somewhere else. So where could that be? That's probably your first trigger. But at that point, for example, Westgold into USA, we thought there was a huge opportunity there because we knew they ate a lot of butter just like New Zealanders and Aussies did. So there was a great opportunity there. And also it's so big. So obviously you have to think about your capacity too. And that's a bit different because some FMCG products can produce as much as they want. Cows only produce so much milk. So we've only got a finite quantity that we can turn into any product. So you have to have something that someone else is interested in, and that's probably by talking to a few retailers to go, oh yeah, there's a gap here. We haven't got that. Because if we talk about America for a minute, they've got thousands of products and there's so much bigger and there's such big ranges and choice for consumers. You need to make sure that you've got something quite different for them to be excited about. And the only reason we started getting listened to by Walmart was that we had a fundamentally different brand story. So we were really clear on who we were, what we stood for. We were all about natural. We had a bit of an attitude that resonated with them because probably the other butters weren't telling as much of a story because they felt they didn't need to because they were a commodity. Where we'd taken the opportunity to really build a story. I guess fundamentally, first of all, is do you need more volume? Are you going to make more money from doing that? Because obviously the costs are higher, particularly if you're exporting it. And then what's the opportunity? What does that mean? Have you got capacity and have you got a good story, good differentiator? If you're one of these people that's a bit risk averse, a bit nervous about it, then don't even start because you've got to be able to take a punt. You've got to believe and have a bit of grit and that you're going to give it everything.
Westland Milk Products was able to open those doors in those offshore markets because you're a bigger company. How can smaller organizations, potentially some that are maybe even running their businesses out of their homes, unlock those same opportunities as you were able to? We
actually got a lot of help from NZTE. They are a good place to start, to open a door, to introduce you if you've really got no idea. For us, you're right, in the US, we were already selling some ingredients in there. So we had a bit of knowledge about the US, but we still went to NZTE and talked to them.
Have marketers got more data than ever before, but less certainty about what to do with it?
There's data coming from everywhere. I don't know if it's less certainty. I reckon it's less time. Time's a luxury. Even though we had quite a decent sized team at its peak, everyone was running so hard, no one looked at things too deeply. There's lots of data, but if you had someone in a team, which I think is more and more important, that's an analyst skill set, you would use the insights more often. You have to choose what's important because it's not just what is happening or those sales have hit this number, but why. The insight is in the why. And that takes longer to understand. And so we brush past it because it's too hard. How do we know? What are the consumers thinking? Well, go talk to sales. Was another brand on special or was something else happening? There's lots and lots, but there's not enough on ROI, which is what we talked about before. There's all these leading measures that marketers have always had. There's plenty of sales numbers. You can get scan data. There's plenty of research we were doing. We were tracking everything, but it still doesn't tell you ROI. Now, some marketers will naturally be commercial. It's probably one of the first things you think about now is, okay, what benefit is that adding, not just to my brand and to awareness and to those funnel metrics, but what is that doing for the company? What is that doing for our bottom line? That should be the first consideration now.
How do you distinguish between data that is genuinely helping you make a better decision and data that is simply giving everybody another dashboard to look at?
I think it depends on where you are in the business. Exec want a particular type of data, ROI. Marketers want to know that what they're doing is getting greater awareness, building more equity into your brand, as well as getting sales. So everyone's got a different need for the data. Media agencies use different data again. Is it impressions? Is it reach? So you need to work out what that data is for, what's it telling you, And why is it important? And the why is the important is the key one, because you're only going to get better if you know why.
After 30 years of experience, are there decisions where you will just trust your gut, trust your judgment, even when the data isn't conclusive?
That question probably relies on the fact that you're using data to make decisions before you do something. We very rarely tested the creative before we did it. And that came down to gut. And that came down to having the foundations right, almost like a checklist, which is, okay, this is the kind of messaging we're using when it's brand. This is the kind of messaging we're using when we're trying to drive more consideration and purchase right now. What's this ad for? Is this doing this job? Is the messaging consistent? Are these key visual identity things in the right place? Gut, for me personally, is quite important, but that gut does come from 7 or 8 years in a business. Year one, I wouldn't have trusted gut. I might have, but I would have consciously been saying, well, I'm testing and learning here. And if it fails, well, I've learned something and we won't do that again. We'll try something different. You don't have time for data. Sometimes you just got to get out there. We'll never do anything.
You've talked about trying to simplify increasingly complex media plans and concentrating harder on the things that are most likely to drive ROI. Has marketing become unnecessarily complicated?
Don't get carried away with what all the media companies are recommending and split your budget 30 different ways. Just pick the best thing and go for it and be really single-minded. The jargon is huge within media. And so trying to even understand what the different types of media were, I think the simplicity that I'm thinking about is, what do you know that works, that you've done before? Stick at it.
So sometimes we need the confidence to say we're not going to be everywhere for everyone and we're just going to do fewer things properly.
100% agree with you. Let's just take social media. I mean, how many social media platforms are there? We took quite a while to get into TikTok as an example, but we were advised that that was the way to go for America. So we listened to an agency that was over there and we did that. And it's been a great medium for us. But then we also launched Instagram in the USA, which isn't performing nearly as well as TikTok. So should we be in it? But none of us are brave enough to go, no, but you need to be brave to go, let's simplify things, let alone all the different media options you've got. If you look at the menu of activities that retailers offer, there's AdWord campaigns, there's in-store campaigns, there's floor decals versus pricing. So yes, the fewer lines in your plan for the year, I think, the better.
You talked about before how much pressure is put on the marketing team within these organizations, more now than ever before. To what extent, as the leader of the marketing team, do you need to shield the team from some of that pressure?
I think you do need to shield some. Some of that happens naturally because your team aren't in the same meetings as you are. So you may be exposed to things in that meeting that they will never feel or they will never see. So that to me is shielding a bit. I mean, sometimes you'll come out and rant and go, oh my God, that was a terrible meeting. And they'll go, oh no. And so they feel your pain. You don't want to tell them when things are really hard work. For example, the latest conversations I was having about ROI and how hard it was to get budget approved. They'll know bits of it because otherwise they're going, why aren't we doing anything? I think you pick the right things, but I think you have to be seen as human and that builds connection with them as well, being quite open.
You've worked with a number of agencies over the years. How do you know when it's working really well?
For me, it's a feeling. It feels like, would I talk to them outside of work? Can you have banter if you're in a meeting? It has to be more than transactional. You have to connect emotionally because they need to feel connected with your brand as well. They need to really believe in your brand. To help you the best way, you have to be connected together. So it has to be fun. Connection is really important. Have your agency challenge us and go, that doesn't make sense. Or your brief's atrocious. Go back and do that brief again because it's not telling us anything. Or why would you want to do that? That seems off-brand. They need to know that brand as well as you do. And so you can have some very good, challenging conversations. And I think that makes the agency community healthy.
You talked about relationship before, which is very hard to form with someone when you're in a room with them for the first time. What's the difference between an enduring relationship and the chemistry that you feel with someone that you've just met?
The chemistry in the room right then is a sense of they get you, they get your brand. What they're saying feels genuine and that there's a genuine interest. It's just not formality. It's not just we got that brand. They genuinely are interested in what you're doing and they get it. They've demonstrated they get it by a couple of things they might have said or the fact that they've gone and purchased it before and have some insight and some good questions.
What responsibility do you think the client-side marketer has in getting the very best outcomes and outputs from their agency?
Huge. I'm a massive believer in briefs. of getting it all down, telling them why we're thinking this, what the context of the whole thing is, what's the background, what have we done before, what are the learnings, what are the mandatories that we must do this time based on learnings from last time, any thought starters that have been in my head, and I will highlight if I'm really hot on something and I think that's the answer so they can challenge me. If we don't give a decent brief at the start, the poor agency doesn't have a shit show because we don't know what we are doing. So what are they answering?
You've worked very closely with sales teams. What does great sales and marketing alignment actually look like?
Yeah, well, probably for several years, I don't think we were aligned as we should have been. Or maybe I should say integrated. We were aligned, but not integrated. So as an example, we would do our annual plans separately. And it took a few years to go, well, why don't we then come together and actually, first of all, understand what you need, because ultimately a lot of our job is to serve sales, to sell better. Now, that could be day-to-day retail tactics or whatever, or it could be the brand building and getting awareness in a new market. So there's some pull off the shelf. I remember one salesperson saying to me, we've got it on shelf, it's your job now. That made me go, well, I don't buy into that fully. We need to work together because I don't want them going, well, it failed because marketing didn't do their job. So for me, it took a while, and then we got into a process where we needed to work together, discuss things, see what their objective was, what are they trying to do in Singapore, what are they trying to do in Taiwan, what are their challenges, what would good look like, and then go, well, this is how we can help. And there's always a budget limitation too, so you can say, I can help in this area, but not do everything. So it's critical we are more integrated. We had a boss who was GM of marketing and sales. And I think that's fine. You had a head of each team, but I don't think you should have someone that does sales and marketing. Obviously, that's very common in most organizations because you can't justify two. But there needs to be a bit of conflict because otherwise it'll all go to what sales need because they've got the ROI and they need it now. So you're always going to take short-term hit or short-term opportunity for sale versus build a longer-term brand. And it probably depends what kind of business you're in with which you should do. But I think you have to be far more integrated and it has to be a real conscious thing.
30 years into a marketing career, what have you stopped caring about that you might once have thought was terribly important?
I think I've started caring more. I've got into brands that I genuinely feel so engaged and passionate about, and I believe they are the best. And it probably started way back with Mainland Cheese. I still think they're great. The brand is amazing. Then Heineken, you'll still find me buying DB products, not Lion products. You do get quite obsessive. But from a technique perspective, probably I'm most obsessive about consistency. Know who you are and then keep repeating it. Repeat it. Now, doesn't always work out quite as easily as you think because a brand does evolve. The identity may evolve. The messaging may evolve, but it's having a plan and then communicating that plan. So being on point with whatever your plan is and not wavering is probably what I'm obsessive about.
If there's one thing every business leader or marketer watching this or listening to this should take away from our conversation this week, Lizzie, what would it be?
Know who your brand is. Get your foundations right, even if it's not the luxury of diving deep. Somewhere have written down, this is the brand's personality, this is how it talks, this is what it cares about, this is what it values. So everything spins from that. Your messaging, your identity is consistent. You're all building to one story, everything you do, every time you communicate.
I think what comes through really strongly is that good marketing doesn't start with a campaign, a channel, or the latest piece of technology. It starts with getting the basics right, the foundation. Understanding the customer properly, building a brand on strong foundations, using data to inform judgment rather than replace it, creating a team where good people are trusted to do good work, and giving your agencies enough clarity, access, and freedom to contribute what you bought them in the process to do for you in the first place. And perhaps experience ultimately teaches you something quite simple. Marketing doesn't need to become more complicated just because there are more things available to marketers. Sometimes the harder and smarter thing is knowing what really matters and concentrating on that. Lizzie, thanks so much for your time this week.
Adam, that was really fun. I learned a lot and I'm looking forward to delving deeper into those over a beer or coffee at some point.